Anyone else feel like Teucer is gonna play a massive role in version 6's arc? Like, you can't introduce a kid back in version 1, make him related to a character with major plot development potential, and not also make him a key player in the story. Whether it's copium or a real possibility, I wanted to explore the concept of making Teucer a playable unit. This video will feature a fully fledged kit, including his talents, playstyle, best builds, and best teams. Oh, and if you stick around, we can talk lore as well. Here are all of my disclaimers quickly listed out, and you can pause if you need to. These will be down below, along with my social media links and music credits. Without further ado, let's begin. So, as always, let's start off with my design philosophy and design overview. Teucer was an interesting case because he's not some original character. He's established as Childe's younger brother, and so when I had the concept of making a playable Teucer, I wanted him to synergize with Childe in some way. Since Childe's an on-field DPS, I figured a support might be Teucer's best option. But I don't want Teucer to feel too niche and only improve his brother's damage, so my take was to generalize it as a Hydro support. After all, that niche hasn't been tackled yet. Naturally, that means my element is going to be Hydro. For his weapon, I'm going with a bow. Now, you might be thinking that I chose this weapon because every elemental support happened to be a bow user, but in truth, this is just a coincidence. My reasoning for making him a bow user is actually due to some lore. In mythology, we have a character who's named Teucer, and in those stories, he's the half-brother of Ajax. For those who don't know, Ajax is actually Childe's real name, so there's already a striking connection Hoyo's been playing at. In this mythology, Teucer is often depicted wielding a bow, and that's why I chose to make him a bow user. It also just seems kind of fitting from a brotherly standpoint. Like, if Childe's mastering the bow right now, it would make sense that Teucer would be wanting to learn at the same time as him. For his rarity, he's going to be a 4-star character. The roster is spread incredibly thin, and I think it would be nice if we got another one to give us more accessible utility. He's going to ascend with 24% HP bonus, which should imply HP scaling in his kit. With that out of the way, let's get into his talents. I'll brush over this first section because there's nothing really special with his basic attacks. Normal attacks deal 4 hits of damage, charge attack can deal increased damage, a fully charged shot deals hydro damage, and plunging attack deals AoE damage. Alright, time for the cool stuff. For his skill, Teucer will toss down an Aquarius bomblet at the enemy, dealing AoE hydro damage, scaling with Teucer's attack, and max HP. He will apply a Bond of Life to all party members equal to 50% of their own max HP. While a Bond of Life is being cleared, a percentage of the cleared amount will become a flat attack bonus, up to a maximum amount. Any uncleared Bonds of Life will automatically disappear after the duration ends, along with the attack buffs. Casting a skill again before the duration ends will reset the Bond of Life, the duration, and its attack buff. It's a relatively straightforward ability. Use skill, get Bond of Life, clear Bond of Life, get attack. Ideally, you want to clear the bond in like one go to have more uptime on the full attack buff, but you don't actually need to clear the entire bond to get the buff, which is good in situations where you heal in increments. For example, let's say you have the Bond of Life, and you only clear half of that in a single tick of healing. You already get half of the attack buff, and that bonus will continue to build up as you heal over time. For non-snapshotting characters, this allows for more flexibility in rotations as you won't be reliant on clearing the bond entirely. For snapshotting characters, however, there's slightly more pressure to fully clear the bond because using an ability before clearing it will only be a partial buff. And then the last part about resetting the stuff is just meant to address a possible exploit with Sackbow. If you use his skill, reset the cooldown, and use it again, you won't stack up to 100% Bond of Life. It'll just reset any healed bonds to 50%. So Sackbow is really only there for extra particle generation. The ability has an 18-second cooldown, the effect lasts for 15 seconds, and it generates 4 particles upon hitting an enemy. For Teucer's burst, he will summon a Mini Mr. Cyclops, dealing hydro damage based on its attack and max HP. Mini Mr. Cyclops will fire a beam at an enemy every 0.7 seconds, dealing hydro damage based on his attack and max HP. It will also follow the active character around, so there's no issue of circle impact. Additionally, when Mini Mr. Cyclops hits, Teucer will heal the active character by 5% of their own max HP, plus a percentage of Teucer's max HP. This additional percentage scales with talent level. This ability lasts for 16 seconds, has a 20-second cooldown, and an 80 cost burst. Teucer's burst is mainly necessary for its healing aspect. It can clear the active character's Bond of Life within maybe 6-ish seconds, allowing you to have around 10 seconds of uptime on the full buff. This allows him to not be reliant on another healer in order to achieve his buffing, but there are multiple incentives where you might want to run a second healer. I'll cover those details later on. Another aspect you might be interested in is his damage. It's going to have a weak multiplier, but it does have a pretty good hit rate to compensate that a little bit. And of course, since he's a Hydro buffer, he will benefit from his own buffs. As a situational aspect, his Hydro application follows standard ICD, making it a somewhat decent rate of application. I wanted to mention this because it will give him some additional flexibility in non-Hydro teams. Teucer's A1 passive will increase the party's max HP by 15% for 14 seconds when he casts his skill. This will achieve multiple things. First of all, he's going to increase his own personal healing when he buffs his own HP. Second, this HP buff will increase the damage of pure HP scaling units like Farina, Neuvillette, or Yelan. Since Teucer's skill buffing only buffs attack, this passive will allow them to buff their damage as well. Third, this HP bonus actually will buff the attack bonus his burst provides. Remember, this Bond of Life effect will scale with each individual unit's own max HP, not Teucer's. So it's actually a good thing if they have higher HP stats, and Teucer will help provide that to the team. I know 15% seems like a low number, but since Teucer's going to be a Hydro buffer, he's naturally going to be paired with Hydro units, which also enables the 25 HP resonance effect, making the effective HP bonus 40%. Fun fact, the idea for increasing max HP was mainly there to give HP scalers inclusive damage buffs. I didn't realize how it affected the Bond of Life mechanic until a little bit later, and I'm very happy that it kills two birds with one stone. Moving on to his A4 passive, when the Bond of Life is cleared, the buffed character gains a 0.6% Hydro damage bonus for every 1000 max HP Teucer has. This effect lasts for 12 seconds and has a maximum of 28% Hydro damage bonus. The attack buff on Teucer's skill activates on any healing, and the HP bonus only requires casting his skill. As such, there's currently no incentive to fully clear the Bond of Life unless you want to max out the attack buff. This passive gives you that incentive. This passive isn't like the skill where you can get partial bonuses. In order to get the Hydro damage, you need to clear the bond. Faster healing can and will be useful in providing more uptime for this passive. Fortunately, this is a universal bonus to all Hydro units no matter if they're attack or HP scaling. To give you an idea of the HP threshold that Teucer needs, he requires around 35,000 max HP. This is pretty achievable, so I don't expect any issues getting to or near that threshold. So that's it for Teucer's base kit. I think the hard part was that since he was a 4-star, I tried to intentionally design his kit to have some flaws. For one, he's supposed to have some energy problems. We can tweak things like particle generation or burst cost so that it's not Faruzan levels of bad, but I definitely wanted to ensure that ER is a very important stat for his build. The second issue is that his healing is single target, but his Bond of Life utility is team-wide. Teucer has the potential to buff his entire team's damage, but since that healing is single target, he's mainly limited to buffing one character. He's in a similar boat to Farina, where maximizing his buffs are reliant on that team healer. However, there is still some flexibility. If you're more focused on a hyper carry comp, then you don't really need Teucer to be paired with a team healer. After all, none of the other team members' damage matters a lot, so there's no need to stress while clearing those bonds. Another interesting aspect is his synergy to enable the Harmonic Whimsy set. As a solo healer, he can enable this set on your on-field DPS. This is because his healing is small over time. But if you were to pair him with someone who burst heals, this synergy becomes worse because you get one stack from creating the bond, and then clearing it in one go just gives you a second stack, but there's no way to continue proccing the effect for a third. So I wouldn't say he's a perfect enabler for this set. Sometimes he can do it, and sometimes he won't. Now that I've covered his capabilities at C0, we can move on to Constellations and see how they bring extra quality of life buffs. Since he's a 4-star, these have some relevance due to its easier accessibility. Starting off at C1, Teucer will grant every party member a 1% incoming healing bonus for every 1000 Bond of Life each character has. This can max out at 10%. This constellation is meant to grant a faster clearing time on the Bond of Life, granting faster attack bonuses and giving you more uptime on the Hydro damage bonus. At C2, when a Bond of Life is cleared on an ally, Teucer regenerates 3 energy. This can happen 4 times per cast of his skill. This constellation will allow him to decrease his energy needs so that he can focus on other stats. It's going to perform a lot better when paired with a team healer, as a hyper carry comp will generally only clear the main DPS's bond, resulting in only 3 energy instead of 12. C3 increases Teucer's skill by 3 levels. This is a small boost to his skill damage, but it'll also increase his attack buff limit. At C4, Teucer will now be able to heal off-field party members, but this would only equal 40% of what the original burst healing would be. Additionally, healing a party member grants them the Eon's Lost effect. in which their next instance of damage is increased based on 1% of Teucer's max HP. This effect is doubled if the enhanced hit is hydro damage. Having this effect is not supposed to imply that Teucer can now clear everyone's Bond of Life quickly. His healing on off-field units will not be enough to clear those bonds in time. This is supposed to synergize with the team healer. If the healer clears everyone's bonds, Teucer will be overhealing the entire party, therefore buffing the damage of everyone, including those who are off-field. But in a hypercarry scenario, his overhealing will mainly apply to the active unit, which will still be a good buff for their damage. It should also be mentioned that this is a great way to buff Teucer's own damage. Moving on, C5 increases Teucer's burst level by 3. This is going to improve Teucer's personal damage and the healing of his shots. Generally, a good constellation. Finally, C6. When each character's Bond of Life is cleared, Teucer grants that party member with a 40% hydro crit damage bonus for the remainder of the skill's duration. This is a relatively simple constellation. Clear the bond and get a decent damage buff. It's flexible to work in teams that are multi-DPS oriented, but also hypercarry focused. Next, we'll look at some of his best artifact builds. I'm just going to talk about his support build, since the DPS is not only not optimal, but it's also straightforward enough to not worry about. For the stands, I recommend ER, but HP works if you have enough. Goblet should always be HP. Then for Circlet, I would go with HP as well. You can choose to use healing bonus if you want to have an easier time clearing the bond, but an HP Circlet further buffs his various utility. For his best artifact sets, Noblesse will easily grant your party with 20% attack, but since a lot of Hydra units have HP scaling kits, it won't be effective in those teams. In terms of a general best set, I think Song of Days Past will be a good choice. He heals pretty frequently, and in a 6-second window, it should be enough to hit the cap, or at least get really close to it. 2-piece options of ER, HP, or healing bonus will be good options for a temporary build. Next up are his best weapons. I would recommend ER weapons like Favonius or Sacrificial to grant more energy. You can also use End of the Line or Fading Twilight for the substat, but Teucer doesn't really make as much use of the passives. Elegy is also a very good choice, but this would only be viable in reaction-based teams for the EM bonus, or attack-based teams with the attack bonus. You can also consider Recurve Bow since it has an HP substat, but I only recommend it if you have enough ER. And as a 5-star option, Silver Shower Heartstrings is going to be his best in slot, since he can trigger all 3 stacks. The burst crit rate is nice, since its burst damage can be useful. For his signature weapon concept, we'll be calling it Void Explorer. It'll have a 454 base attack, an ER substat of 61.3%, and the following passive. When a party member's Bond of Life increases, gain 1 stack of Voided for each party member affected. 1 stack grants the user an HP bonus of 8 to 16% and a 2 to 4% healing bonus. This lasts for 16 seconds and can stack up to 4 times. Each stack is counted independently for each party member affected. It's a simple weapon that works well with Teucer, and the fact that he does a quick team-wide Bond of Life increase means that he can stack all the HP and healing buffs in one go. The whole niche about independent stacks just means that if he were teamed up with someone like Clorinde, who actively raises and clears her Bond of Life, she would only be refreshing 1 stack, not granting all 4 for Teucer. The only alternative user is Sejuine, but since her Bond of Life ability is tied to her own kit, she can only get 1 stack, which isn't a lot in terms of bonuses. Now, let's talk about team comps. This is a section I was really excited to cover. While he specializes as a Hydra support, his teams aren't limited to just Hydro users. His attack and HP buffing is universal, so he can fit the role for other teams. In solo Hydro, his energy needs will be much higher since there's no teammate to properly battery him, and he's easily replaceable compared to others. But he can get the job done as a budget Hydro user. For example, freeze comps. His Hydro application is mainly single target, but it should be enough to sustain freeze on an enemy. Additionally, his attack buff works on Ayaka, Ganyu, or Wriothesley. Same thing with Taser teams and their respective units. For solo Hydro, he's probably better in Quick Bloom, and if you wanted to run him for Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, or Vape comps, you'd likely need a second Hydro user. We can also cover its flexibility and Hypercarry comps versus a multi-DPS team. In Hypercarry, you only need to clear said Hypercarry's Bond of Life, meaning that Teucer's own healing should be enough to buff that character. An example team might be Neuvillette, Kazuha, Teucer, and Zhongli. The only person who matters is Neuvillette, so Teucer only needs to worry about clearing his bond. But if you have a few good off-fielders in your team, there's also a much higher incentive to bring a team healer. That way they can heal the off-field characters and give them a buff. Let's say we have a team of Fischl, Xingqiu, and Teucer. If you slot in a team healer, you can clear all of their bonds, granting Fischl an attack bonus, and then Xingqiu with an attack and hydro damage bonus. There's one non-Hydro DPS that has interesting synergy with Teucer, Arlecchino. Teucer can grant her 50% Bond of Life, and this can be used to grant her Pyro Infusion while also providing more damage. Since Arlecchino naturally clears her own bond, she can also clear the part that Teucer provides, therefore increasing her attack buff. If we want to get really technical on how the coding would work, Teucer's Bond of Life always gets priority on clearing. This ensures that a random chunk doesn't get erased after the duration ends. It also ensures that Arlecchino can immediately start building up attack. Now, let's just go down the list of Hydro users and explore how well Teucer can synergize with them. I'll try bunching them up in similar groups. Barbara and Sigewinne are good synergies for a team healer, and this helps you clear the entire team's Bond of Life much easier. Sigewinne in particular has a leg up since she has her A4 passive, which provides additional healing to characters with Bond of Life. Due to the fact that we already have double Hydro with this core, I would mainly recommend these characters in a mono Hydro comp. On a similar note, Kokomi has more flexibility with Teucer. If you run her on-field in her burst, she can heal the entire team's bond, buffing her own attack, HP, and Hydro damage bonus. It also leaves room for 2 off-field DPS units, and this can be of any element. However, if you intend to run Teucer with an on-fielder, Kokomi will take up some of the field time trying to clear everyone's bonds, making her a less viable option in team healing scenarios. For off-field DPS units, let's talk about Xingqiu and Yelan next. Generally, people like to focus on how a buffer buffs an on-fielder, but as solid off-fielders, Teucer can benefit them as well. I think the main caveat is that you'd want a healer that can work on off-field units, so that these two don't take up much field time getting healed up. Furina's in the same boat for an off-field DPS, but I wanted to give her own section because of the potential for HP and healing issues. Furina will benefit a lot from Teucer's various buffs, but we have to remember, healing a unit at 50% Bond of Life, alongside a 50% current HP value is roughly 100% healing in total. If your team healer is not doing a crazy amount of healing, there's the effect that Furina won't be able to generate as much fanfare because her Bond of Life gets healed first, and only the residue is actual healing. So you just need to keep that in the back of your mind if you were to pair these two together. In the right scenario, synergies are godly, but in the wrong one, there's actually anti-synergy. On-fielders like Ayato and Childe have clear synergy with Teucer, since he can buff their attack and Hydro damage. Ayato gains a tiny bonus from Teucer's HP buff, since its own damage partially scales with HP. And then for Childe hypercarry comps, Teucer will naturally be a great pairing. And then there's Neuvillette, another on-fielder. I just wanted to point out the fact that since he's a crazy unit, it'll be very hard to uplift other Hydra units without skyrocketing Neuvillette's own performance. So there's a pretty big chance that Neuvillette is going to be Teucer's best synergy, purely because of its insane damage floor. A lot of people naturally pair Neuvillette with Furina because of their synergy, but Teucer works best as a Furina alternative if you're someone who doesn't own her or if you're using her in a different team. And then for the rest of the Hydro users, I'll cover their synergies. Mona, Candice, and Nilou are all general supports in different aspects, so unless you specifically build them as DPS units, Teucer won't pair with them as well as the others. Am I missing anyone? Oh, yeah, Hydro Traveler, they'll work well with him too, I guess. Overall, Teucer is meant to specialize as a Hydro buffer, but I wanted to make him a character that was flexible enough in non-Hydro comps, because we desperately need another 4-star Hydro who can do that. His damage isn't as high as Xingqiu, and his healing isn't as good as Barbara, but he does have decent Hydro application, where he can enable some teams as a budget option. Now that I've covered his gameplay, let's talk about his story. Since Teucer's an established character in Genshin, I won't be making up any backstory for him, but I did want to cover a fun little lore theory as to how they could possibly make him playable. Finally, a chance to flex some lore knowledge of mine. Okay, we have some evidence that time in Genshin does pass at the same rate as real life, and this only applies when we view it from the perspective of a day one player who has been playing alongside the releases. One of my best examples is in 3.4, where Shenhe discusses Yunjin's performance happening the year before, which is a direct reference to the one she did in 2.4's interlude chapter. Another example is in 4.1, when our sentence in the Fortress of Meropide is around 45 days. 45 days is roughly a month and a half, the same time frame as an entire patch in Genshin. And wouldn't you know it, in 4.2, one patch later our sentence officially ends. If we follow this same passage of time, then from the time we're introduced to Teucer all the way back in 1.1, and assuming we see him again in version 6, 5 years would have passed. And it would be super easy to say that they could age up Teucer in that time span, if not for one major issue. People don't really age in Genshin. We're almost 4 years later, and little Timmy is still like 8 years old crying on the bridge about his f***ing pigeons. So you can't really age him up naturally. Can he still be playable at his current age? Not really, because when it comes to the small characters, it's just girls, and I highly doubt Hoyo's gonna bring in a small guy anytime soon. So if Teucer were to be realistically playable, we have to somehow age him up to the medium-sized model without disrupting the actual flow of time Genshin has. And I actually know a way this can happen. Have any of you read Childe's story? In Story 4, we are introduced to the backstory of his time in the Abyss. It's stated that he was in the Abyss for 3 months, but when he returned to the surface world, only 3 days had passed. You know where I'm going with this now? Let's say in version 6.0, Teucer falls into the Abyss, and he's trapped there until like 6.2, 2 patches later. 2 patches is roughly 3 months, or 90 days. 90 days in our world is 90 months in the Abyss. 90 months equals 7.5 years. Once Teucer returns to the surface world, he'll have aged up significantly, but everyone else in Genshin technically remains unaged. What I like about this theory of mine is that it would address how we age up a character without aging up the rest of the world. It's how we can make Teucer into a medium-sized model so that he can be a playable character, while not affecting the age of everyone else. It's also cool that this theory ties directly into Childe's story. Since the two are brothers, there's going to be some interesting parallels that can be drawn from the storyline. But that's just a theory. A lore theory. Anyway, just remember, this is just a crack theory that I had, there is no evidence to support this, but I do think there's some merit to it being an actual plot device given the information I actually provided. But at the end of the day, I just really want Teucer to have a meaningful role in the future. They introduced him all the way in 1.1, and I know he's coming back down the road. I just want his character and his story to be used to the fullest extent that it could possibly be. That's gonna do it for this episode of Character Creator. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. Let me know in the comments what aspects you liked about Teucer's kit, what you would change, and any alternative ideas you may have. And let me know if you have any other theories on how they could make Teucer playable. Thanks again for watching everyone, and I will see you all next time. Bye!